All right. What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another quarantine car talk. And today's talk is going to be on different types of dynos. What are the various types that we have, and what are the differences between them? And basically give you guys some more information on what those differences are and why some might read differently than others. So stick around because it's going to be interesting, and hopefully we have a great discussion and I can clear up a few questions about dynos and dyno numbers. So we'll just wait for people to join in, and hopefully around the 2 to 3 minute mark we'll go right into the topic. Wait for people to join in. Looks like we got a few people joining in. That is awesome. Let's hope we get a few more, and hopefully give about another 30 seconds to a minute. And again, jump right into the topics. If you guys are seeing the title, you know what we're going to talk about, and that is, of course, dynos, all the different kinds there are, and how they read, what they read, and which one should you trust more, and why. So all that is coming up here shortly. Appreciate it, Mr. J. Lopez. Thank you so much, man. And by the way, guys, those of you guys that are joining, make sure to hit the thumbs up button and like this video. That way, YouTube will hopefully share this live to other people, and we can get a lot more people in here for more discussions. All right, so again, about 15 more seconds, and then we'll get right to it. And by the way, if you're just stopping by, make sure to comment down below, say hello. But anyway, guys, let's get right to it and go right into the topic that we are going to be discussing, and that is, of course, dynos. Dyno numbers, the different types of dynos, and which ones read what and why they read how they do. Now, I'm going to preface all this by saying, guys, that dynos are a tool. They are a tuning tool and a tool only. It mainly should be used as a way to tune your vehicle safely off of the road, off of the street, and really do not get fixated on the actual final numbers, because as you'll see later on, as I explain all the dynos, the numbers are going to be very different across the board between the different types, and even between similar type dynos. There's a lot of factors that go into the dyno numbers, and all it is a tool at the end of the day to help you make sure that your car is dialed in correctly. So do not get fixated on the numbers. But of course, there's people that like to know the numbers and see what's going on. So let's get right to explaining all those right now. So there are various different types of dynos, but the top, I would say, 3 mainstream dynos, and the ones that most people are going to be familiar with, are going to be a Dynojet, which is one of the most widely used across the board in pretty much everywhere. A Mustang dyno, which is very similar to a Dynojet. It's got rollers, and the car sits on rollers. And then a mainline dyno, which is a hub dyno. And these are the dynos that bolt right onto your actual hub, and so you don't have your tires rolling or anything. Now, let's talk about the mainline dyno first, because that is the one that is the most rare and not really used in general. So not many people would ever really get a chance to put their car on a hubline dyno. So we'll get that one out of the way first and talk about that before we get to the two main ones, which are the ones on the thumbnail, and that is the Mustang and the Dynojet. So a mainline dyno or a hub dyno basically doesn't use rollers and bolts right up to the car's hub. So you cut the car in the air, the rear tires are basically removed from the car, and you put the dyno bolted right directly to the axles. And those dynos typically are gonna read probably the highest because you don't have that loss of power from the rotational mass of the larger diameter tire. And so those are gonna probably read a little bit higher than most, but most of those can also be adjusted with settings to calibrate what the dyno is going to read based on temperature, air density, and all that kind of stuff. So mainline dynos are great. They're going to probably give you the highest readings, but they're not going to be the same as the Dynojet or the Mustang by far, because it's a completely different design, eliminating the tires out of the equation. So now let's move on to the Mustang dyno. So the Mustang dyno, guys, is an inertia-based dyno that is using, generally will have two individual rollers, and the rear tires will actually sit in the middle of the two rollers. And so the rollers are spinning inversely of each other. And the Mustang dyno is able to use something called an eddy brake to generate a friction or a force against the roll of the tire, simulate the load that the car is going to see when it's on the street and driving down the highway. Typically, in general, Mustang dynos tend to read between 12 to 15% lower than a Dynojet. So if you're looking for dyno numbers, you probably do not want to go to a Mustang dyno, because in general, they are going to be reading lower because they're adding these extra loads, which are going to pull and rob some of that power or horsepower numbers and torque numbers away from you. So that is why people tend to say Mustang dynos are heartbreaker dynos or things like that, because they're going to read a lot lower than a general typical Dynojet. Now, that isn't to say that you cannot modify the settings on a Mustang dyno to read as close to what a Dynojet would, but you start running into really having to go in there and change the settings. And most dyno operators are going to have one set setting across the board for most, that'll fit a general profile of all their cars, and not have to mess with it. And that's typically what will happen. But you can go in there and adjust different settings. It's been shown with the C8 Corvette whenever they were doing the dynos for Motor Trend, trying to get dyno numbers, and they were reading somewhere like 600 something horsepower, which obviously is wrong, but that's because they had some settings changed in the dyno that wasn't calibrated correctly. So a Mustang dyno is going to read about 12 to 15% lower than a typical Dynojet. So if you are making, in the case of this car, which was actually dyno tuned on a Mustang dyno, Pat G uses a Mustang dyno, and with the heads and the cam, it dynoed at 521 horsepower to the wheels. And when it was at on a Dynojet before the heads and cam, it actually put down almost 480, 477. So it was almost the heads and cam is supposed to generally make you at around 70 to 100 horsepower gain on the car. And if you do the math between 480 from the Dynojet and 520 from the Mustang dyno, that's only 40 horsepower gain. Now, like I've mentioned all the time, dyno numbers are just tools. And if you really want to see what your car's gained from a specific mod, you always have to get the car dynoed at the same dyno. And that is why we will be taking this car back to the Dynojet, that the same one that it's gotten all its baselines, all its other runs done to find out what it'll do on that dyno. And that'll give us a much better representation. But if we look at 520 and apply the 12% loss or the 12% lower reading, that would put this car at about 580-ish horse, 580, 590, between 580 and 590 horsepower. And so when you, if that's what it puts down a Dynojet, then we'll know that obviously Pat G's reads about that 12% lower. Now Pat G's dyno historically reads quite a bit lower than most dynos here in Houston. And so I would venture to say it's closer to that 15% mark. And if we were to do 15% loss on and calculate what that would be on a Dynojet from 520, you're looking at exactly 600 horsepower. So all that is something that I'm going to hopefully prove to you guys and show you guys when we put this thing on the Dynojet and show you guys the difference in the numbers. But Mustang dynos typically will read about 12 to 15% lower. And like I mentioned, that isn't 100% guaranteed. Mustang dynos can be adjusted to read up higher, closer to what a Dynojet would. But in general, they are going to be reading 12 to 15% across the board. Now let's get on to the Dynojet and why is it that the Dynojet reads higher than a Mustang dyno in typical fashion? And the answer to that question is because Dynojets do not use an actual eddy current brake or force any type of load on the rollers. They have what's called an inertia dyno, and if you notice on a Dynojet, the rear tire is actually just straight on top of the roller. You only have a single roller, and you have the tire right in the middle on the top, and that's it. Whereas the Mustang dyno has two rollers, and the tire sits kind of in the middle, and it spins both of them. This one just has a big roller that is bare sitting on the top, and it uses inertia to get the ball rolling and to calculate what it's all the horsepower numbers. So there isn't any actual simulated load, and therefore your numbers are going to be a lot higher. And again, by about 12 to 15%. So on a Dynojet, your number is going to be higher because you're not simulating load. You're not forcing load on the dyno. It's simply just using inertia and how fast you can spin this big heavy roller, and that is what it uses to calculate your horsepower. Again, this car made about 480 to the wheels before the heads and cam. And like I mentioned, cam and heads should make about 100. I would say on average about 100, maybe 120 if the combination's right. But you're looking at about 80 to 120 with 100 horsepower being the average. And if that's the case, then we should see somewhere around 580 horsepower on the dyno when we put this thing back on the same dyno that it dynoed before the heads and cam. Now, all this stuff is also going to change based on weather, the current conditions, if it's very humid outside, if you're at altitude or if you're not at altitude. All that can also affect the dyno numbers, and that is why you have things like STD, standard correction factor, the SAE, which is generally typically another correction factor. And so uncorrected, you're going to get a certain number, and then you can either use a standard correction or a SAE correction. And typically standard correction will read much higher than an SAE correction, which is typically used across the board from all tuners. They'll use SAE as the numbers for their correction factors. But if you want to get that higher number, then you'll want the STD number, the standard correction number. And if you want to get a more true number, then you would use SAE. So there's a lot of things going on with dynos, and that's why I mentioned they're just a tuning tool. You cannot get fixated on, well, man, I took it to the dyno and I've got all these parts in, and I see there's 2 or 3 people out in, the East Coast making 600 horsepower on their setups, and mine only put down like 540 or 550. Something's wrong with my car, or why didn't it put down the numbers that those guys put? And it is never going to be the same. It's always going to be different unless you're take both cars and put them on the same dyno on the same day, I mean, you can get all kinds of different variations. And ultimately, what you really want is to use a dyno as a tuning tool so that whenever you go down the track, you'll see the results on your mile per hour, on your time slip, quarter mile time slip, eighth mile time slip. So that is really the biggest difference, guys, with these dynos, Mustangs versus Dynojets, and why you really shouldn't get fixated on the dyno numbers. This thing only put down 521 with heads and cam, full bolt on everything. And if you go on the internet, you'll see a lot of 5th gens with heads, cam, all putting over 550 horsepower down. And so am I freaking out? Am I thinking, man, something's not right? My tune's not on point. Something needs to get adjusted? No, not at all. I just know that typically all those other runs were done on a Dynojet, and this was a Mustang dyno, so it's going to read lower. And even if I've done it on a Dynojet and it read near or lower than what they are reading, this combination is different from theirs. And until we get into the track and see the mile per hour that it can put down in a quarter mile, you won't see true numbers. And really, mile per hour is probably the biggest key identifier of power and horsepower, because the mile per hour, it doesn't matter if you spin a little bit or how you get off the line. The amount of mile per hour that the car can get in a quarter mile is going to be very similar across the board, whether you have a great launch or if you spin slightly. Your quarter mile time might be affected, but the mile per hour is always going to be pretty consistent. So that is the biggest driver and measure of how much power your car has. So let me get to here a couple. What's going on, Eric? Hey, what's up? You still need to get some LED lighting in your garage. I'll hook you up. Just let me know. We're from Altona, PA, Lumax Lighting. Hey, man, appreciate it. Yeah, I definitely need to add a couple more lights, and I just haven't gotten around to doing that. K6 GSXR Gixxer 1000. What was your dyno numbers with just headers in E85? I have the same car except it's a 6-speed and just put on the same headers as you. Just want to know what to expect when it's getting dyno tuned. So this car with the headers and E85, I believe it put down between 445. I think it was like 445, 440, between 440 and 450. So that's probably what you should, as a 6-speed, you're going to make a little bit more. So I would expect between 440 and 455. Somewhere in that range is going to be 450 is probably pretty good for that car. Again, like I've just mentioned, dyno numbers are going to vary widely. So it depends. If you're on a Mustang dyno, it might be a lot lower than if you were on a Dynojet. Really what you want to do is E85 and headers will net you about 20 horsepower for the headers and another 20 or so horsepower for 85. And my car baselined at 412, and it was right on point, right around par, made 445, 450. So it was right around the 40 horsepower gain from headers in 85. So that's really what you're going to see with a good E85 tune, and headers is about 40 horsepower increase, and quite a bit on torque as well. But anyways, guys, that is pretty much the definition of all the different dynos and why they do what they do. This car put down 521 horsepower on the Mustang dyno. We'll put it on the Dynojet and look at the difference on the Dynojet, and then we'll circle back around and we'll go ahead and explain again the differences. Again, I'm expecting this car to be putting about 570 to 590-ish, really about 580 to the wheels on the Dynojet without the nitrous. And then with the nitrous on the 100 shot, I'm expecting to see somewhere on the 650 to 700 range. So we'll find out. I need to get the dyno appointment taken care of so that we can go in and make sure that I show you guys, what it does without nitrous and what it'll do on a 100 shot. Appreciate it, Mr. K6 Gixxer 1000. But anyways, guys, that's all I really have for you guys today. if you guys have any questions, more details about the different dynos or stuff about this car, I'm open to talk for a little while. Inspur says, are you running TPMS sensors in your drag tires? No, I am not. No, so the drag tires, I have them really only for the track. Now, right now they're on the car because, I mean, it just, street tires are not, those tires up there are not hooking whatsoever. But I think I might have found a solution that is going to help me get new tires for that and be able to take these off and save these ET Street Rs for the track only and still let me hook with these. And that is the new Nitto NT555 R2 tire that just got released this last month. Actually, this month in April, the beginning of April, they released it. And it is supposed to be their best competition drag tire. It's basically the Nitto's equivalent of the Toyo R888Rs. And it's supposed to be really great for driving in the rain, which I really don't even drive this car in the rain anyways. But it's a competition drag, DOT competition drag radial tire, DOT legal competition drag radial tire, and they make it in the same size as the stock ZL1 tires that I'm using here, which is a 305/30. So I'm probably gonna get those on order next month. And the good thing about those compared to the Toyo R888s is that those are actually a lot cheaper. The R888s, they do not make a 305/30. So I was going to have to go to a 315/30. And that, of course, I was going to probably have to adjust and maybe go with the 295 in the front to offset the height differences. And those 315s are going to cost about $850 to $900, but very expensive. And the new Nitto NT555 R2s are actually a lot cheaper. They're about $330 each. So basically the same price as my ET Street Rs. So about $660, $650 for the pair. And it should be a much better tire for the street and hopefully have the same kind of results that these did and hook from a roll. Don't know that competition DOT drag NT55R2 will hook from a dig, but as long as it can hook from a roll, I am going to be happy with that. That means I won't need to be driving around with the mismatched set and welds in the back and these in the front, and I can save the ET Street Rs for just the drag strip and the track and still be able to go out and go to Mexico in these tires with the Nittos and hook and run really, really good. So yeah, no, I don't run the TPMS. Long story short, I don't run the TPMS on these because I typically only put them on, go to the track, and then take them off and put my stock ones back on. And I've got the TPMS GM repeater thing to reprogram the tires every single time, so I don't have to worry about check the tire lights or anything like that. So what has been your guys' experiences with dynos, and what are your thoughts on people that get fixated on dyno numbers or that want to have the highest dyno number? No problem, Inspur, no problem. All right, I'm going to be here about another 5 minutes in case someone joins in and needs a question answered. If you guys have any more questions, and then looks like today's been pretty quiet. Not that many people joining, so I'll cut out a little bit early around 9:30. So we got a few more minutes in case you guys have any more questions or anything like that. But if you guys need me to go a little bit over the dynos for those of you guys that are just joining in a little bit later, the short gist of it is Mustang dynos read the lowest, about 12 to 15% lower than a typical Dynojet, but that's not necessarily always the case. And the mainline dyno removes the wheels and bolts directly to the hub, and that's going to read the highest because you don't have the wheels force to take into account. So that is the concise version of everything that I talked about. But yes, so how's it going? How would I pronounce that? Hongs. Hopefully I pronounced it right. Hongs Jiang. Our local performance shop got a Dynojet and quote for E85 tune from 19 SS is 950. That sounds about right, because you're looking at about $600 is typically what they charge us, what a tuner would charge you, and then the ECM credits to unlock it is 4 credits on the 19s, so that's $200 right there. And if you're going to be using the dyno, then that's another $100 usually for the dyno part of it. So yeah, 950 sounds about right. It could be more closer. Like if they said 900, I think that and they're doing the tune on the dyno, then that sounds about right because of the credits and everything you have to purchase for these cars and the HP tuners. So 600 is typically what the fee is, what tuners charge. And then on top of that, you have to pay for the credits, and then dyno sessions is typically about $100. So that sounds about right. Sounds reasonable. So as of now, they still are closed. Now, I think Friday becomes the first day that everything's supposed to open right back up again. I'm not sure if the track is going to be one of those. Typically, the track here locally, the quarter-mile drag strip, does Friday night test and tunes, and that's usually when I'm at the track for Friday nights. And so I haven't seen them post anything about them being open on Friday. But more than likely, what I would expect is they're not going to open until possibly next week. So we'll see if hopefully they might open this Friday. If they do and the weather's great, then you best believe that I will be there. But if not, then I'm hoping next week. Hey, what's going on, David? Yes, it is. So the SS is completely dialed in, and it is ready. I do need to fill up my nitrous bottle, so I'm gonna be doing that probably tomorrow. Hopefully, I should be able to get the nitrous tomorrow. But once I get the nitrous, that'll be it. The car is dialed in. The tune is set. Everything has been verified and tested. The jet sizing, the AFRs, everything. The car is dialed in, ready to go. And I'm hoping to get to the track to do some runs, and we'll hopefully, once I get there, I will probably do just the first NA pass just to kind of see where the car sits that day, that night. Of course, the weather's a lot different now compared to back in the winter. So we'll see just what it'll do, what it'll run. I'm hoping it can still run a high 10-second pass in 2000 DA. Maybe it'll surprise me and run a little bit better, or it'll run like a low 11. We will see. But it'll all depend on how this thing can hook and take off from the line. So hopefully everything works well, and we can, show you guys some good information. And then, of course, second run will be on the 100 shot. I don't have it on the 150 shot just yet because ultimately my goal is to try to run a 9. And I don't know if the 100 shot will get me there, but if the 100 shot gets me very, very close, then I will throw the 150 in there and then run it, get the 9. And then when you're running 9s, you have to have like a cage, and I don't want to put a cage on the car just yet, or really not ever. So I'll probably back it back down to a 100 shot for when I'm going to the track, and just enjoy it on a 100 shot, because it's just such a blast, even with just a 100 shot. All right, guys. Well, unless anybody new that just joined has any quick questions, I'm gonna go ahead and call that today's live video, guys. If you joined late, you can always go back, check it out, and probably start about the 3-minute mark, and it's about 15 minutes worth of differences in dynos, and you guys can kind of go back through that. Let's see, Hong Jiang says, so we piece, do you think a combination of headers, E85, and intake tune would be? That's my next step, but I haven't contacted the shop yet. Is it possible to discuss about the price with the shop? About what price do you think a combination of it? If they're putting in, if they're providing all the parts, then, or are they just tuning? Because if they're just tuning, they really, the tuner should not need to charge you again, except for maybe possibly the dyno time that the car's on the dyno. If they're going to be retuning the car for, you know, headers and the intake. Now, if they're going to be installing the headers, installing the intake and the 85, and then doing the tuning and all that themselves, then you can start looking at, you know, the cost of headers, the cost of the intake, and then a little bit of labor to install all that. So, yeah, you could definitely talk with the shop, and they would definitely let you know up front about all that. Kid Mike says, does an 8-speed LT1 perform the same as your 10-speed? Stock for stock, I think the 10-speed is slightly better, just because of the way it shifts. It shifts it shifts a lot smoother. And stock for stock, the 10-speed from a roll will probably do well, a lot better than an 8-speed. The power band, it keeps the car in the power band, in a smaller power band window, which is great for the car. Now, the 8-speeds, once you get those tuned, for some reason, they're able to get them. The 8-speed tuning is opened up a lot more than the 10-speed tuning on these cars. So I'm still having to baby it off the line. I can't get that I can't get faster than a 1.66 60 foot. For some reason, the car feels really lazy from the first up to 2,500 RPM, and then it kind of goes. And that laziness really is killing my 60-foot time. And there just doesn't seem too much things you can do to remove torque management and all this stuff to help that just yet. So we're waiting on the 10-speed tuning to kind of open up even more to help us get a lot better. But definitely 10-speed stock for stock would be a little better than the 8-speed. J Trail, will you change your torque converter for better takeoff? I probably could, but I don't think I'm going to be doing that anytime soon. I might look into doing something like a 3,000 stall, something small. I'm not really looking to do a big stall. I really like the fact that I'm able to just go and drive the car like normal. Bigger stalls tend to cause it, make the driving experience when you're driving around the streets and, you know, on the highway a lot different than, you know, the stock converters. And eventually, you know, who knows where I'm going to end up being if I decide to go with a positive displacement supercharger, a Whipple, a Magnuson, or something like that down the line, you know, in a year or two. Then a stall really is not going to be the best thing for me, because those things are going to make a lot of power instantly off the line, and all you're going to do is spin the tires. So, excuse me, don't think I'll be doing a torque converter anytime soon. Now, hopefully the tuning gets unlocked so the transmission can flash faster and the transmission can get up to speed a lot faster and remove that laziness. But for now, I'll just deal with it, and hopefully the car still traps good and runs really good. And might not get the times that I want, but the car will be very fast, and I'm sure on the street it'll be really, really good. Appreciate it, Kid Mike. Anyways, guys, that is going to be it for me today. I hope you guys enjoyed the content. Like I mentioned, if you guys got here late, definitely check it out. Rewatch this. It's really short. It's only going to be like 15 minutes or so. And hopefully that helps you guys understand dynos and numbers and why you guys shouldn't really worry about the numbers too much. Worry about the mile per hour at the track. I'll see you guys in the next one.